In 2 Chronicles 16, verse 19, it says, "For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the earth, to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him." When Dwight Lyman Moody set out to see the world at the tender age of 17, God and Christianity were very far from his mind. He was determined to make himself rich and to leave behind the backbreaking farm labor and poverty of his youth. Because Moody's father had died unexpectedly when Dwight and his siblings were young, his mother struggled hard to feed and care for the family, with the children working and contributing whatever sustenance they could as they grew older. Though Moody was respectful of his mother and loved her, he was also restless and wanted to break away from the monotony of rural life in New England. Eager for material success, he left home. He headed for Boston with several strikes against him. He had no money, no place to stay, and no assurance of a job, and he was barely literate, with only about 4 or 5 years of somewhat schooling. Throughout the years, Dwight's mother, Bessie, had read to the children from a Bible at night. Evidently, the seeds had not taken root in Dwight's heart, for he showed no interest in spiritual matters at the time he left home. For several days, he walked the streets of Boston in search of a job, but without success. His his country boy attire and his rough mannerisms evoked stares of contempt and ridicule from the city-cultured Bostonians and raised doubts in the minds of prospective employers. Dwight's uncle, Samuel Holton, had a shoe store in town, but initially, Dwight was too prideful to ask his relative for a job. He also knew his uncle to be a stern taskmaster. Besides, the same uncle had earlier told him to stay away from Boston because he wouldn't fit in well. So after several days of fruitless searching, Moody humbled himself and asked his uncle Samuel for work. Samuel was willing to hire the young man, but with 2 stipulations. First, the youth had to be willing to adhere to his uncle's rules. And second, he was to attend church with his uncle each Sunday. Moody's attendance at church was regular, but his chief preoccupation continued to be financial gain. Then one day, Moody's Sunday school teacher, Edward Kimball, came to the shoe store to talk with Moody, and Kimball's visit led the young man to a spiritual awakening. So listen to this story, because this is an example of how one person taking out time and being obedient to God can significantly change the lives of another person, but then that other person could be someone who changes the lives of many more. So this is what he said. When I was in Boston, I used to attend a Sunday school class. And one day, I recollect my teacher came around behind the counter of the shop. I was at work, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he talked to me about Christ and my soul. I had not felt that I had a soul until then, he said. I said to myself, this is a very strange thing. Here is a man who never saw me until lately, and he is weeping over my sins, and I never shed a tear about them. It was not long after that, he wrote, that I was brought to the kingdom of God. Moody's first goal was $100,000. After he became a Christian, he continued to attend church and work for his uncle, but eventually youthful restlessness beckoned again for him to move onward. And in the fall of 1856, he took a train to Chicago, which was considered a wild and fast-growing city that abounded with opportunities for aggressive young men like Moody. Chicago was also a much better fit with his personality, as he had always felt out of place in the high society populace in Boston and at his uncle's church. By this time, Moody had set his sights on building a personal fortune of $100,000. And it didn't take long for Moody to find work in the Windy City. Taking advantage of the experience gleaned from his uncle's business, he was hired at a footwear store. His drive for personal gain must have been obvious, as one of the proprietors said to him. His ambition made him anxious to lay up money. And one of Moody's fellow clerks observed, Moody was a first-rate salesman. It was his particular pride to make his column foot up the largest of any on the book. not only in the way of sales, but also of profits. He took particular delight in trading with notional or unreasonable people, especially when they made great shows of smartness and cunning and thought themselves extraordinarily wise. Nothing was ever represented in the smallest particular, but when it came to be a question of sharpness and wit between buyer and seller, Moody generally had the best of it. It was evident by now that Moody was devoted his energies to a task he didn't do half-heartedly. He went all out, holding nothing back, and nobody could keep up with him. Within 4 years, Moody had saved up around $10,000. That's no small feat in a day when most men seldom earned more than a few $100s per year. He was making solid progress toward his financial goal, but during that time, another passion began to burn within him. Upon arriving in Chicago, he had dutifully become a regular churchgoer, but a notable turn took place in his heart during his first year in the Windy City. A spiritual awakening of sorts swept the city, and in a letter written to his mother on January 6, 1857, Moody wrote, "There is a great revival of religion in this city." Up to this time, Moody had been actively inviting people off the streets to attend church with him, yet he hadn't taken steps to show personal concern for their spiritual condition. But during this period of revival, Moody met and came under the care of Christian mentors who inspired him to take a more serious interest in prayer, spiritual growth, and evangelism. So let's go see what God has to say about him putting God's will first.